Have you ever witnessed strange lights in the sky or experienced missing time? If so, you're not alone. These high strangeness incidents happen to people every day, all over the world, and we want to get to the bottom of them. Since 1969, MUFON has been at the forefront of UFO investigations, and we're not stopping now. Join Alex and Ruben, a team of highly skilled MUFON field investigators with years of experience committed to getting to the truth. We'll investigate UFO events through guest interviews and witness accounts, analyzing data from various sources. Let's work together to unravel the mysteries of the unknown and get answers to the questions that have been unanswered for so long.
Hello and welcome to MUFON Up Close. I'm your host, Alex Tusia, with my co-host, Ruben Uriarte. Ruben, how are you?
Okay. Yeah, we have an interesting guest today, and looking forward to hearing about the conference that they just put together and lots of other information there. But other than that, been an interesting week. We didn't have any hearings any congressional hearings. I think that was put on hold.
Yeah, I was looking for them, but couldn't find them. I wasn't sure if they were just hidden or if they went on as scheduled.
Then there's a new whistleblower, Matthew Brown, that was interviewed by George Knapp and Jerry Corbell with new whistleblower, and fascinating stuff on the immaculate. What is it? The second phrase of it. I want to say deception, but it's conception. That's what it is. On some of the data there, so it's interesting news that's been happening.
Yeah, I'm glad all these whistleblowers are kind of coming out of the woodwork, and we're getting different pieces of the puzzle that way, at least.
Yes, constellation. That's the word. Immaculate constellation. There's so many. It's hard to keep up with. But,
too many.
It's interesting where we're developing, and yeah, the MUFON Symposium is right around the corner too, in July.
Yeah, that'll be a really exciting. They have a lot of really good speakers. We're talking to a couple of the speakers later on in the coming months, so definitely looking forward to hearing what they have to say as well.
Yeah. Also, we had our first crop circle in England that came out about last week, and very interesting. But it may mean that we may get a whole deluge of variety of these crop circles, so we'll keep our focus on that as well.
Yeah, that's very exciting. Maybe we can pull up a picture of that later and dig more into it in another episode.
Great. Well, I'm excited about the guests that we have there.
Yeah, let me introduce her for us.
Okay.
Anniversary Feinstein. She has had a distinguished career as a civil servant where she held a secret clearance. She retired from the DoD with 27 years of experience, and she was the budget analyst and resource advisor for foreign military sales. After her retirement, she filled the position of executive vice president of Value Plus Merchants Association, and she held that position for over 8 years prior to her full retirement. She became a member of MUFON in 2015, and her interest in UFOs and UAPs resulted from a contact experience she had in Izmir, Turkey in 1981. Since that time, she has been researching the UFO UAP phenomenon. Anniversary's experiences have continued as well. She is a voracious reader of books regarding UFOs, UAPs, and contact. She also attends at least 2 UFO conferences every year, and she's done that since 1989. She holds a lot of important positions in MUFON as well. Currently, Anniversary is the MUFON Case Assistance Group Director, also known as CAG. She is also the CAG International Team member, a member of the Experiencer Resource Team, the ERT, a CMS coordinator, Colorado Field Investigator, and is also the Colorado MUFON Membership Director. Until this year, she also wrote monthly book reviews for the Colorado MUFON newsletter. As a contactee and ERT, Anniversary is passionate about listening to and helping others who are going through the trauma of the contact experience. She is a happy wife and the mother of 3 grown children and the grandmother of 6. She lives alone with her husband and 3 little Shih Tzus that she adores. She loves to create during her free time. She does quilting, wood turning, pottery, stained glass, and makes jewelry. She is a grounded, creative person who has had out-of-the-ordinary experiences. Her main goal is to be of service, and we believe that she is of great service. So please join us in welcoming Anniversary.
Thank you for having me.
Anniversary, welcome. My God, you have an impressive background.
I'm a busy person.
Yeah.
I do a lot. My husband and I, neither one of us sits still very long. And I'm not sure exactly where to start or what you would like me to focus on. But during the time that we're talking, I would like to talk about MUFON and the value of MUFON and all the people that work for MUFON. I think that it is important that people understand that MUFON is all volunteers. It's a nonprofit. Most of the people that are involved have either had experiences or sightings of their own. And a case is not worked easily. In other words, even with the simplest of cases, you have to do a process of elimination. You have to always interview that witness and take good notes to support whatever disposition you come up with. And a case can take hours or it can take days. We're always looking for more volunteers as far as field investigators. Because we right now, as the director of CAG, I'm also the acting state director for all states that do not currently have state directors. And what that means is at this moment, I'm the acting state director for 9 states. And in being the acting director, I recruit, I train new field investigators, I assign cases, I review cases, I provide feedback, and I approve, I approve the cases. If I already said that, I'm a little nervous. Anyway, that's a lot of work. Plus, for the states that have issues with not being able to get all of their cases accomplished, I lead a group of case assistance members, and they volunteer additional time outside of their states to complete cases that need to be worked. And I review, I assign, review, and approve those cases too. So I'm really happy to say I'm very pleased with the group of CAG members that I currently have. They're amazing and they do really good work. I'd like to say that that's across the board, but we're human. So it doesn't always happen that way. I want to say that MUFON, it's a great organization full of hardworking, dedicated people. I'll stop for a moment. This is my clock that I had to have. Got it in Vegas. I think it was one of my husband's and my anniversaries, actually.
So it's ringing right on the hour. Right?
Isn't that something? Anyway, where was I? I was talking about, oh yes. Anyway, we are, as far as I know, the only totally nonprofit organization that does UFO research and actually gets back with whoever that witness is and tells them their feedback. Now, a lot of times objects are known. And if they are known, because we're nonprofit, we take the time to explain to them what it is and how to identify it in the future. So we try to educate the people as to what they're looking at. And there's a lot of stuff in the sky right now that makes it more challenging. The other night here, as part of the photoforensics boot camp, we had a sky watch at my house. And we actually got to see a Starlink train of 64 satellites that had been up in the atmosphere for 3 days. And I was surprised to learn that, you learn as you go, that they don't just stay in a straight line. And so we had some, even though they were following a similar path, that were actually side by side or starting to separate out because they're programmed to take certain orbits. And it was amazing. We were lucky. But when you look up in the skies now, especially with night vision goggles, you're going to see a lot up there. And so unless an object just all of a sudden appears and disappears or shows 7 of the observables, which has to do with phenomenal speed or trajectory that we know is impossible for one of our known aircraft to take, it's not always easy to identify what is unknown. We can't say specifically what it is. Yeah. All we can ever do is say that this object, we've looked at everything we can think of, and there's nothing that we know of that it matches. Mm-hmm. So people that are reporting sightings to MUFON.com need to know that we're not going to probably be able to tell them what it is unless it is something conventional or known. Okay. That would be like saying, this is this type of craft and it is from this particular solar system, and it's piloted by these types of beings.
I wish we could give that type of information.
Wouldn't it be great? It would be great if we could, but unfortunately we cannot. And being part of the, and this is another part of MUFON, people don't always understand that we actually have, which Alex, an experiencer resource team. And that team is there to be sympathetic listeners of people who have had experiences. Now, not all experiences are good, and some experiences start out pretty horrific. The main reasoning for that is because all of a sudden you find yourself in a situation that you never, ever were taught could ever happen. And you're in front of beings that are obviously not human, even though some of them do look human. And even if their intentions are good, because sometimes they are, because they're different, our first reaction is physiological. And we go into a trauma state. Mm-hmm. And we think that we're losing our minds. And we just need to know that somebody's going to listen and they're not going to think we're crazy. And a lot of people for many, many years have been very hesitant to talk about their experiences because they're made fun of. Some people lose their families and friends. Some people lose their jobs. And it's all based on belief systems. But we have no control over the experiences that we have. Anything can happen to anybody at any time. Yeah. So MUFON provides a place for people who have had these experiences to talk to people who will not judge them. And if they want to be connected to an online support group, or if they happen to be fortunate enough to live in a state that has contactees that get together on the ground in their state, they can be directed to that so that they can participate and talk to other people who are having similar experiences. And also the ERT has a group of vetted professionals. If you want to talk to a psychologist, we can connect you to that. If you have what you think is missing time, we can also connect you to a clinical hypnotherapist who has been vetted to help you to retrieve that time. But I wanted to stress that. And I also want to make a note of the fact that if you are referred to a professional, MUFON's nonprofit. So we're not going to pay for however many sessions it may take to unbury whatever you may want to unbury. And I want to say one more thing too. And that's that it's like opening Pandora's box. You have to really think about wanting to remember, because maybe you don't need to remember, but once you do, you can never put it back. Mm-hmm. And then you have to somehow incorporate it into your life so you can go forward. But it's an extremely worthwhile organization. I feel very privileged to be part of it. And I very much appreciate the people I've come in contact with. And I have to say early on, with different things that happened with me, I never reported it to anybody. Initially, I didn't even know there was a MUFON. I didn't know that there were other people like me. I didn't know that there were UFO conferences. And I went through my own ridicule. Mm. Okay. But and I also found out down the road, and maybe I'll talk about that after a while, that my contact was generational. And I think a lot of contacts are generational. Whether your parents talk about it or your grandparents talk about it or your siblings talk about it. I was fortunate enough before my mother passed away to find out that it was generational. Mm. Wow. I didn't know. Now, you can also, so let's go back to when I was young. Now, when I was young and I was a teenager and I lived in Florida, I remember seeing an enormous UFO with a bunch of people standing out in the front yard. I think it was Sarasota, Florida at the time, looking up at the sky and wondering what the heck that apricot-colored object was. Now, it was probably, looking at it visually, it was bigger than a basketball hovering in the sky. And we were all looking at it. And next thing we knew, in the news, it came out that it was swamp gas. Huh. Did I even give it a second thought after that? No, I did not. I never, ever thought about it again. Okay. Now that was one of the first experiences. I had one of my younger sisters tell me, oh, well, I can stand at the window and I can call in UFOs and they come and I guess one night she was calling them in and one of my other sisters was there because I was raised with 4 sisters. And I was next to the oldest. She said, when it came, my other sister was knocked out and she was the only one that saw it. And I'm thinking, okay, wow. It's funny how in life people can talk to you about things and you can roll your eyes and you can think, okay, all right, whatever, and not give it much thought. Now, years later, it was in 1981, I had given birth to my last child. And he was maybe not even 3 months old. And I had my first conscious contact. And the reason why I'm saying conscious is because my mind allowed me to remember the contact. And before that, for whatever reason, I have no idea why, my mind, my brain, whatever you want to call it, stuffed it into my subconscious. So there must have been something about it that was not acceptable to me that might have caused me to not be functional. And so it was stuffed into my subconscious. The reason why I know I had a previous contact or other contacts was because I said, not now, it is not a good time. Why would I say that? To a being that I'd never seen before. Now, I was taken aboard a craft. I was taken aboard the craft through actually a pane of glass.
Ah.
Yeah, I was taken right through the window. And in Izmir, Turkey, I lived on the 7th floor, and the windows went from the ceiling to the floor, and they did not open. And the curtains were pushed to one side, and the sheer curtains they were all locked in the ceiling. Okay, so you'd had like square knobs that you could screw down to keep them from moving. And they were all pulled to one side, and I was pulled through this glass in a blue-white light. Now, when I was pulled through that, I went blank. I didn't remember anything until I was coming to aboard this craft, and I was on a narrow platform or bed, or I don't even know what to call it, gurney, I don't know. But I was laying on something. And at my right foot, there was a being. Now the being, and I don't know how familiar people are with Zetas. Zeta Reticuli, they call them. I guess they come in a variety of colors, some of them very dark blue or gray, and some of them, lighter colored. Well, this guy was like a little child with a big head, and he had long, skinny arms, and he had big, dark eyes. But if you've seen the cover of Transformation, his eyes were not as large as that. They were between the size of a human's eyes and the cover of Transformation. So they were fleshy above and below, so his eye shapes could change. And at one point they changed, and I knew he was laughing at me, because the whole time that he communicated with me, it was all telepathic. But I looked at him and I said, "Who are you?" And he said, and this scared the crap out of me, he said, "Consider me your surgeon."
Oh.
And everything started to go darker. And he realized that he had frightened me. And he communicated to me that he had removed something from the base of my skull. And he told me that had he not removed it, I would have died a young woman.
Oh.
And at that time, I was in my, I guess, mid to late 20s. And he said that I had things I needed to do. And because of that, he had helped me. He talked to me about reality. He talked to me about time overlapping, which the example that he gave was this. And at the time, I really didn't understand what he was saying to me, okay? Because we're not taught what reality truly is. We're just not. Now, he told me that as an example. He said, you have a room full of people. They're sitting around, they're having a meal. He said, all of a sudden, the ceiling falls in. He said, when the ceiling falls in, some people around this table will know that the ceiling fell in. He said, others, it will be like nothing happened at all. Okay. So I was like, okay, I don't know what that means. So I took it and I stuffed it. Okay. But he was talking about And I've had younger generations now tell me, oh, well, that's the Mandela effect. Do you, either one of you know what that is?
Yeah.
Okay. And I said, well, I don't know about that. All I know is how it was explained to me. And then over 40 years later, I actually had a physical event that showed me. Now, it's interesting because the very best teacher in life is experiential, okay? People can tell you whatever they want to tell you, but you're not going to really know if something is true or it's real unless it happens to you. And that's one of the problematic things that happens to contactees. Mm-hmm. Because they don't know what the heck is happening to them. They're trying to talk about it, and they can't get anybody to believe them or to follow them. And they actually do think they're losing their minds. Well, I'm here to tell you the very first thing that happens before that is the experiencer, that contactee, they think they're losing their mind. Nobody has to tell them anything. And the very first thing I did after that experience was buy a book on mythology of all things. Why would I do that? But I did. Okay. So that was like the very first book that I read. I can't remember the exact title, but it's downstairs in my library. And my library has, I don't know how many hundreds of books. Okay. And we keep buying more shelves because I don't want to read anything fictional. I only want to read factual. Mm-hmm. And I want to talk with people who are having experiences like mine, because that networking is important, because until I die, I will be continuing to try to put the pieces together, because it's my reality. It's part of my life, like it or not. Okay. And as it turns out, it's also part of my children's lives, because they've had experiences, and so have my grandchildren. Okay. And it's funny how at first they tell you about it, but they tell you a little bit of an abbreviated event. And then years and years later, because my children are now, my oldest one's almost 50. So in their 40s, they're all in their 40s. Later on, for no apparent reason at all, then they start talking about other parts of the experience that they had. And I'm like, why didn't you tell me this before? You know, why all of a sudden is this coming up? Okay. So I can share some things. But anyway, the experience that I had, it was time overlapping. Okay. Because I stuffed it away for over 40 years. I was at a UFO conference. I always go to the UFO conferences that I can go to, and I always go to the closed door sessions because it's important to me to be there for somebody who's having a brand new experience and is having a hard time processing it. Mm-hmm. Okay. Right. So I like to be present. That way, if I'm needed, I'll have an opportunity to say something. Because I get it. Okay. Some people will have very, very pleasant experiences, and they're, God, it's funny. You've got a combination of contactees. Mm-hmm. I have an astrophysicist friend who is very cynical. In fact, he's a hoot. He makes me laugh because he's so cynical. And he'll sit in on these closed door sessions, and people will say things, and they're all in his mind, airy, fairy, boy, or they don't know what they're talking about from his opinion. But they're serious, and they are their own valid experiences. And just because you haven't had an experience does not invalidate it in any way.
Right.
But his experiences, just to make a long story short here, is that he was taken over a long period of time, and they were taking his sperm. And these people were, or these beings, and I call them beings, and I think it's highly offensive to call them creatures, only because personally, if somebody called me a creature because I was different, I wouldn't appreciate it. Okay. So I try to communicate in a way that is receptive to me. He tried to talk to them. He was trying to communicate. I mean, he's an astrophysicist. He's trying to get them to talk to him about what's going on and why they're taking him. And they're just looking at him and ignoring him, and not responding. And then he was afraid that he was afraid for his children. He wouldn't tell his wife about the fact that he was having a contact. And I said to him, hey, chances are your children will have contact too.
Wow.
That's just the way it is. But I don't, from my perspective, necessarily consider it a bad thing. I think as time goes by, your perspective changes. But I was sitting outside of this closed door session before it started. I was sitting there with my husband. And this is my time overlapping experience. And all of a sudden, this voice says to me, it's time to start using your name. Now, I was born as Anniversary Ann Cable. And I was very shy. My father was a military brat, and I moved all over the place growing up every 2 or 3 years. And I was teased from coast to coast. And because I was very, very shy, I started going by Annie because it was easier, because I was shy, because it kept me out of focus. Okay. So this voice says, it's time to start using your name. Now, my husband's sitting there with me and he's not hearing anything. And then the voice says, names have a vibration, and the vibrations of your name help you to accomplish the things that you came in to accomplish. It is time to stop hiding. It is time to start using your name. Now, I'm not exactly sure why, but I went into total hysterics. I started sobbing uncontrollably. I had this very deep emotional reaction to using my name. But from that moment forward, I started using it. So if you can imagine all these people that have known me all these years as Annie, and they're all trying to get used to Anniversary, it was a little tough. And I still even now have some people that say to me, do you mind if I call you Annie? And I will say, call me whatever you want. Just understand that I am Anniversary. Okay. So anyway, we go into the closed door session. Barbara Lamb is leading as the mediator. I love her. She's a good friend. Yeah. And she could take one look at me and see that I was not doing well. So she left me alone. And then from there, we went into the main ballroom, whatever you want to call it, at this hotel, at a StarWorks conference, and sat down for the MC to come out. Well, Jimmy Church walked out. And this is going to sound crazy, okay, but it's absolutely true. I looked up on the stage, Jimmy walked out, and I said to the lady next to me, oh my God, look at Jimmy. He's walking. He's lost all this weight. He looks terrific. What happened? And she looks at me and she says, what are you talking about? The lady next to me. And I said, Jimmy, oh my God, he's not in a wheelchair. He looks wonderful. Oh my goodness, what happened? And she says, what are you saying? And I said, he's always been in a wheelchair. All the years I've ever known him, and I've known him a lot of years, he's been in a wheelchair. I've seen him at various conferences. I've seen him on Facebook. He's always in a wheelchair. He always has an entourage of people around him. Now, do either one of you know Jimmy Church?
Yes.
Okay. I thought I knew him too. Okay. Well, I knew him a different way. All right. So the lady says to me, you need to talk to Jimmy. And I said, okay. So later in the day, I approached Jimmy Church at his little booth. And I said, hello, Jimmy. My name is Anniversary. I said, I have a question. He says, okay. And I said, have you ever been in a wheelchair? And he says to me, not in the last 30 years. And I said, Jimmy, I'm serious. And he backs up and he looks at me and he gets real quiet. And he says, what do you mean? And I said, I've always known you in a wheelchair, always, with an entourage of people around you. Always, always, I've seen you that way until today. Then he gets really quiet. Then he says to me, I think I really frightened him, okay? Then he says to me, was it in the past or was it in the future? Huh. And I said, well, it was definitely in the past, definitely. And then at that point, he just wanted me to go away because I was a crazy woman, okay? So that night at the banquet, I'm all dressed up. Jimmy Church approaches me. He puts out his hand and he says, hello, I'm Jimmy Church. And I said, Jimmy, I know, you know me, I'm Anniversary. And he just leaped backwards. I mean, both of his feet were off the ground. And in the next moment, he was gone. Now, I thought I'd lost my mind. Okay. But then I remembered what I was told when I was in Izmir, Turkey, by that being and time overlapping. And all of a sudden I understood that time is not linear. And I got a totally different perspective on reality. And my perspective on reality shifted to reality being like, okay, if you take a bunch of sheets of paper, okay, and you stack them on a table, each sheet of paper is a timeline. Or let's say a series of linear possibilities that could happen to you while you're here in this three-dimensional reality. Okay. One of the other things that being told me was that nothing can ever happen to you that is not meant for you. Okay. So let's say, like on that day, you make a change. In my case, I started using my name. Okay. From that moment forward, I've used my name. And I'm sitting on one of these little timelines where I've had these experiences, and there are certain experiences on that same sheet of paper ahead of me if I stay on that timeline. The minute I changed my name, I shifted to another piece of paper in that stack. Okay. Because the experiences based on the changes that I had made were on a different timeline. So I shifted. So I understand reality as being many stacked timelines. Your consciousness exists on each one, but you have a super consciousness directly tied to your soul. And you will end up wherever you need to be in order to have the experiences you need to have for your soul's growth. Now, this was a major shift for me because I believed in the 100th monkey, and I actually thought that whatever you do is going to directly impact what happens to me in my reality. And all of a sudden, I came to understand that my reality is totally up to me. It's based on my actions, inactions, decisions, indecisions, whatever I do, that I'm actually adjusting my future all the time. And I believe that people shift between timelines or the Mandela effect all the time. However, the only time you really are aware of it is if something is out of place. And then I had another example because I'm hard-headed. And I was still trying to process this stuff, and I was really wondering if I was losing my mind. Okay. 2 months passed. I'm at my house. I go into my closet, and I look over on the shelf. My husband and I do cowboy action shooting. I don't know if he told you that or not, but and with cowboy action shooting, you wear 1800s clothing, and you shoot, a rifle, a pistol.
That's so fun.
Yeah, and a shotgun. You shoot at targets, and you basically compete. Okay. And you don't want to miss a target, and you want to do it as quickly as possible. Mm-hmm. But I have all these boots that I normally don't wear any other time, but I had them up on the shelf, and I look over and I see a pair of boots that I do not recognize. And I was like, my husband put his boots on my shelf. And so I yank off the boots, and I'm looking at them, and they don't look big enough. So then I set them down on the floor next to my foot. And I thought, well, wait a minute. These look like they might fit me. So I took my foot out of my shoe, stuck it in the boot. It fit. And so I took it back off, grabbed it up, went out into the bedroom, set it on the bed in front of my husband. And I said, where did these boots come from? And he says to me, honey, those are your boots. And I said, no, they are not. I have never seen these boots before in my life. They are not my boots. And he says to me, honey, and I went, oh, crap. It happened again. But I got a perfectly good pair of boots out of it. Okay. But most people, like I said, unless something is obviously out of place, you're never going to know. And so my whole perspective on reality changed. And I know that just like the extraterrestrial being or interdimensional, we can talk about that being told me, nothing can ever happen to me that is not meant for me. And no matter what you do, it's not going to affect whatever might happen to me. That's on you. And I might even, based on where my super consciousness is, I might be living on a different timeline than you, and you're still there on my timeline, but it's not your super consciousness. Wrap your mind around that one. Okay? It's very interesting. But the being also told me that there is no such thing as death. He told me when you step outside of your physical form, you still know where you begin and where you end. Okay? He also told me to tell people not to be afraid. And I work on that. I actually work on that every day. Okay? Because he said, you create your own reality. It has to do with your belief system and your thoughts. Okay. And I don't know if you've seen this as an example or not, but if you know a person that's constantly wailing at the moon and complaining about this and complaining about that, and there's always some kind of crap going on, if you know somebody like that, you will notice that that person continues to have all kinds of crap coming their way. And it has to do with their thoughts. So he said, tell people not to be afraid. He said, fear is a very strong thought, and it will manifest in your future. You will create it. And it's unfortunate, but I have seen that manifest with some people around me in really tragic ways. So he also told me I was his brother. Now this is when his eye shapes changed. He said he communicated to me, it was all telepathic. He communicated to me that I was temporarily in a changed state. And at that point was when he was laughing at me because his eye shapes changed. And I knew that somehow I had gotten caught in the gravitation of this planet, and that he had been hanging around waiting for me to get unstuck. But then he said to me, his next communication was, "You're temporarily in a change state. However, you will again be as I am." Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. People talk about, it's really upsetting. We may just be in a holographic reality. We may not actually be physical. Okay. And I'm thinking, who cares? Who cares if we're physical? I mean, if my emotions and my thought processes are here, and things that are going on around me are affecting me in that way, if we talk about the human being as being a soul, then why does it matter whether I'm holographic or whether I'm heavy matter?
Yeah.
I mean, what does it matter? And what's frightening about that? Because when you think about it, the fact that we create our own realities and our thoughts are creating all the time.
Yeah.
If we become totally conscious of that fact and we learn to control our thoughts, all kinds of amazing things could happen. Mm-hmm. But we have been born into a world where we are taught to be afraid, and we are taught to always look somewhere else instead of ourselves. Okay. So that was my first conscious contact. And then for a long time, and I had other stuff too, but it was like paranormal stuff. And I don't even know if it was, the two kind of blend together a bit. And I know this even with the people that I've dealt with through the ERT, where something is happening and that something that's happening or the encounter that you're having and it is not normal or what you would consider being normal. How do you know if it's a ghost? How do you know if it's an interdimensional being?
Mm-hmm.
How do you know if it's an extraterrestrial? How do you know?
That makes it that much harder to kind of deal with and process as well. If it can be any one of these number of things, you kind of deal with all of those in a different way. So it can be very taxing on people.
Yeah.
But I can tell you this about contactees. And not just because of the contactees that I have had the privilege of talking to and working with through the ERT with MUFON, but other people that I have talked to over the years, because I started going to UFO conferences because I realized they existed when I met my husband. We've been married 36 years, 37 in January, and every year at least 2 conferences, minimum 2 conferences. And you talk to people during breaks. You listen to them during closed door sessions. People want to share, so you learn all kinds of stuff. Okay. And this is the determination that I've made. Contactees know other contactees.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. You do. It's almost like a baby knowing if an adult is a male or a female. It's the same kind of thing. Okay. Now, I have my opinion, and my opinion is that contactees are normally very sensitive people. They are, whether they're empathic, whether they're psychic, whether they're mediumistic, they have sensory abilities that are beyond the normal human being. Because as much as we would love to be normal, we're not. Okay. And that's obvious from the time that we're very young. Okay. On top of that, they tend to be very creative, whether they're writers, whether they're musicians, whether they're artists with some type of element. In my case, I'm an artist, but I just can't make up my mind which element I like best, except I do love stained glass. Okay. Mm-hmm. And I love it because of the fact that it's colors and light combined together. And I think that's very healing. And something appeals to everybody. Okay. So they have that in common, and they're also service to others.
Mm-hmm.
Every single one that I have ever met. And I do not think that any of those qualities are bad, which is going to lead me to the next thing that I believe, because you figure I'm in my 70s. I've had years and years and years to think about all this stuff and to come to the conclusions that I've come to based on my own experiences. And I listen to people tell me what they think, and some things resonate with me and some things do not. But that's okay. You know, we don't all have to agree. Anyway, now I lost my train of thought again. Do you remember where I was going? Anyway, I have been privileged enough to have experiences. I've had many, many sightings. I'll tell you one sighting I had here in Colorado. That sighting was very unusual. If you're familiar with Colorado, my husband and I were driving north on I-25. We came to 225 and we headed east, because I think it ends at 225, if I remember right. Okay. And it was dusk. And so we were looking at the horizon. And all of a sudden, directly over Interstate 225 comes this object. It was the color of hematite, and it was geometrical. And it was tumbling like toward me, tumbling. It was amazing. I've never seen anything like that prior to that, and I haven't seen anything like that since. And I don't think we have anything like that. Okay. But it came right up to the vehicle we were in. My husband and I were both looking at it.
Wow.
And I know we yelled out expletives as the thing shot off to the south. Okay. Very, very interesting. Okay. Can't explain it. But I do, like I said before, just because I have not had an experience does not invalidate it in any way. Okay. And my husband and I were both together. We were going out one time to, to the Sanctuary of Light in, I'm trying to think we were going to get married there. In fact, we did get married there. And we had an unusual experience with that too. Anyway, but we were heading out to Sanctuary of Light, which is in Elbert County in Colorado, near the Black Forest, right near the Black Forest.
Okay.
And we're heading down the road. My husband points, we weren't married at that time, but he points out and he says, look at that UFO. And I'm going, what UFO? And he's pointing and pointing. And I look up and the thing is like this at first, and it goes right up on edge, and it's a circle. And then it goes right back down, and then it goes in over the forest where we're going to go because we're going to do camping. So we go in there, and there's all kinds of people milling around, getting their campsites ready and everything. And we're asking them, did you see that? Did you see, the UFO that just came in here? And they're saying, no, there was a UFO. Yeah, it was right above the trees. Nobody saw it because human beings do not look up.
Mm-hmm.
And now it's even worse because they've got their eyeballs glued to cell phones.
Right.
Even while they're crossing the street.
Yeah.
So they don't look up, and unless you're looking, you're not going to see anything. You're just not. So we had that experience. We actually, now I want to say this, when you have experiences, a common thing happens. You try to make it a dream. Do either one of you understand that, how that works?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Okay. Afterwards, you're rationalizing it. You're trying to fit it somehow into your reality. And you tell yourself, well, I just had a dream. That didn't really happen.
Yeah.
Now, early on, Leo Sprinkle, he was an amazing man, and he was a tremendous loss when he died. He worked with contactees. He was at the University of Wyoming, and every year, when my husband and I first got married, we would go up to Wyoming to the university where Leo Sprinkle would have, he'd have a conference for contactees. So we would go to this, to this conference. And we would also go to a place called McGuire's Ranch. And McGuire's Ranch at one point in time was owned by a man, a rancher. And this man, he couldn't find water on his land. And he said that the ETs came down and they helped him find water on his land. Well, he went into Laramie and was telling everybody. And he was at that point marked as a crazy person. And for the most part, he and his family were run out of town, okay, because of the ridicule of a small town. Kind of like Travis Walton, when his experience happened to him. It was that kind of thing. Well, the university bought McGuire's Ranch because they're an agricultural college or university. And, and they put their livestock and stuff out there, but they would let Leo Sprinkle, let the contactees that came to town go out there and vector or try to call in UFOs. And we had a couple experiences out there.
Here, before we hop into your experiences, Anniversary, let's take a quick break and then looking forward to hearing what was happening to you in Seth and Wyoming.
Okay.
From Iraq and Afghanistan, our brave warriors are coming home, wounded. Some with wounds you can see, some with wounds you can't see. Wounded Warrior Project was created to support our men and women coming off the battlefield. Please help carry these warriors the rest of the way home. Get involved at woundedwarriorproject.org.
MUFON is the voice of thousands of like-minded people who want to see change. We speak up against UFO secrecy. We engage governments and agencies around the world on the topic. We share information with the public through our journal, website, newsletter, social media, and even our own TV channel. When you join MUFON, you add your voice to the cause. Few things are more important in our time than understanding the UFO question. Join MUFON. Find your friends.
we're back.
Okay.
Anniversary, I just want to start off by saying thank you so much. I've been loving these stories. I think they're just fantastic and can't wait to hear the rest of them. So tell us what else happened in Wyoming.
Well, I want you to understand, I'm talking off the top of my head, whatever comes to my mind, that because there's been a lot of experiences and I probably should write them down. Anyway, so people were told they could go out to McGuire's Ranch to vector or call in UFOs. Okay. So at that time, my husband and I had a big van. And we knew that in order to get what it was we were looking for, that we had to keep the number of people down. Oftentimes, when people are trying to see something or have an experience having to do with extraterrestrials, interdimensionals, other types, crafts, anything like that, they end up in big groups. And you've got people talking about this and talking about that and not focusing and all kinds of stuff. So we knew that we were going to go out there with a specific mission in mind. Now, there was my husband, me, a lovely woman named Janet East, and a gentleman named, and also a very sweet person, like a big teddy bear, named Bruce Somerville. Now, we had other people that wanted to come in the van to go out to McGuire's Ranch with us, and we turned them away because our objective was to go out there to communicate with whoever these beings were and to request that they give us once and for all a totally conscious experience to definitively show us that the experiences that we were having were real. Okay? That was the message. And we were all focused on that. So we went out that night to McGuire's Ranch. We passed a bunch of cars that were parked alongside the dirt road way before we parked. And we went way beyond them. We went up over a little hill. We went into a little valley. And on the other side of the valley was another little hill. So we were all by ourselves and we backed the vehicle up. Now it's getting dark, but it's not totally dark yet. And so when we got out of the vehicle, there were other people on different parts of this ranch that were still trying to get situated. But we, in case anybody wants to try this will give them good information. We got out of the van. We held hands. We visualized a pillar of night glow white anchoring to the center of the earth and spiraling up into the cosmos. So in essence, we were creating a beacon of light. And then we said, here we are. And then we said, this is what we want. We want to know once and for all, totally conscious, that the experiences that we've been having are real. And we stood there with our hands held, focusing on that for a while. And then we just joined our hands and we stepped back and we waited. Now, at that point, there were still other lights, headlights you could see here and there milling around. But then all of a sudden, there was a corona of light on the other side of the hill on the road that we'd come down. And it was just sitting there. So we're looking at it. And the more we're looking at it, the more frustrated we're becoming, because we're trying to focus on what it is we came there for. And there's this light. So we're starting to comment on it. And my husband says, wait a minute. Did he tell you the story at all?
He did. He did tell us his side of the story. So it's
okay, well, he gets up on top of the van and he starts screaming.
Yeah.
He hates when I say that he's screaming, but he was screaming. He says, get in the van, he's screaming it. And we said, What are you talking about? And he says, get in the van right now. We said, what's going on? And he said, just get in the van. My husband can be pretty animated. So we all, at that point, we just got into the van, and I was sitting on the back bench. Janet East was sitting right behind my husband, who was in the driving seat when he got in. And to the right of him, in the front seat, was Bruce Somerville. And we asked him, what is going on? And he said, there's just a light. And we said, what do you mean? He said, there's just a light. He turns on the vehicle. He doesn't turn on the headlights because it's one of those old vans. It's not one of those automatic ones. Mm-hmm. And he turns onto the dirt road. We came down and we crossed the hill. And there is this big light on the ground. Now, I'll describe it as best I can. My communication abilities are different than my husband's, okay? I kind of paint pictures because I'm very, when I communicate, I see pictures, and when people talk to me, I see pictures. Mm-hmm. And I think it's connected to the fact that I'm a little dyslexic, but I've always been like that. I always thought everybody else was like that, and I found out, no, that's not right. But anyway. So we crest the hill. There's this gigantic light on the ground, big enough to fit the van. Now, what's amazing about it is there's no light coming down to it. And it looks like a gigantic pot of night glow white, frothy boiling water. Yeah. The reason for that is because somehow the gravity was causing the rocks and the dirt to jump. So needless to say, I came flying off that back bench, and I'm standing between my husband and Bruce Somerville. And we're all staring at this light. And my husband starts this monologue. And the monologue has to do with, well, if we drive into the light, maybe they'll pick us up, they'll answer our questions, and they'll bring us back, okay? Meanwhile, the rest of us are totally silent, okay? And he's continuing. Now, at that point, the light starts to move toward us, and it's moving about the pace of a man just walking, okay? But it's moving toward us, and Seth puts the van into reverse, and it's pacing us. It's not jumping on us. It's just staying that same distance. So we're backing up, and Seth is saying stuff like, oh, well, or if we drive into the light, maybe they'll pick us up, they'll take a skin graft or something like that. They'll answer our questions, and then they'll bring us back. Okay? Now, he kept going on and on and on until eventually he got to the point where he thought about our teenage children down in Aurora, Colorado, because we were in Laramie, Wyoming. And he realized we couldn't do it. So he said, the worst that could happen is we'd end up dead. And then he said, and I remember looking at his hands on the wheel, which is kind of funny. He says, here's my music again. So we'll let that play out real quick.
Is that a different song than the first
one?
one?
Oh, yes. Yeah. Yes, it plays different songs. And I can even set it to Christmas music. I can set it to different things.
That's so fun.
And it comes apart and it goes back together again. It just all comes apart, and yeah, it's cool.
Maybe you should have it Close Encounters of the Third Kind theme someday.
Well, yeah, but I wish they did. I like different things. And I like different people too. I mean, people that can think outside the box. Mm-hmm. But anyway, so he finally says, after he says, the worst that could happen is we'd end up dead. Then he says, we can't do this. And the minute he said that, the light gone. Just disappears like it was never there. And then Bruce Somerville went nuts. And he started screaming at my husband and telling him, saying to him basically, why didn't you drive into the light? And he was just really angry. And I said, Bruce, that's not fair. We were going so slow, you could have jumped out of the vehicle at any time and run into that light.
Mm-hmm.
But he was also saying stuff like, I wanted to get my hands on those little, whats and strangle the life out of them. And, because he had sperm taken from him.
Mm.
He was a great big guy, and he was wanting to get his hands on them, which was not our objective, but it was his. And he ended up committing suicide because he couldn't deal with it.
Jeez.
This whole phenomenon, people say, oh, well, you're talking about this because you just want attention or something. No. All any of us want us to be fit is to fit in, to have friends that can accept us the way that we are, to be part of a group. And when you start having experiences and you think you're the only one, where do you fit? You don't fit. And so it's not something I think that a person would automatically choose, because it's a lot to process. It's a lot to process. But at that point, when the light went away, at the time we felt like kind of like a fish in a pond and the hook comes down. And if you take the hook, it's on you. Okay. But then again, if something is positive, is it not going to give you free will? If it is negative, would it not just jump on you without giving you a choice? So all those thoughts were going through our heads, but at the same time, we realized, oh my goodness, we asked for totally conscious, definitive proof that the experiences that we were having were real. And Janet immediately looks at me and she says, Annie, because I was using that name at that time. She says, Annie, she said, this is not a dream. We are all here. We all had this experience. Do not make it a dream. It was real.
Mm-hmm.
I'll never forget that. And so after that, we'd already gotten what we came to get. So we headed back down the hill, and past all the other people. We stopped long enough to ask them, did you see anything? And they said, no. And they said, how about you? And we said, no. And we left. So that was pretty phenomenal. So I have definite opinions about things. I do not think that in order to establish contact, that you need to meditate, even though I think that does open you up more. I do not think that you have to be vegetarian. Mm-hmm. I do not think that you have to follow a certain set of rituals. I think you basically need to keep the number down so that you do not have one fearful person in the group.
Right.
Because I think if you're dealing with benevolent beings, that they'll stay away if they feel like they can do any harm. And people who are afraid can be very traumatized. So I think that keeping the numbers down lessens the probability of that occurring and increases your chance, if you're all of like mind and you know ahead of time exactly what you want, that it is totally up to those other beings to decide whether they want to comply or not. Because just like we like to have free will, they have a right to free will too. Okay. So it's not complicated. And it shouldn't cost people a whole lot of money to have that experience.
Yeah.
If they really, really want it.
Mm-hmm.
But I go one step further, and I believe that, when we're children, we're taught trite phrases that are truisms, like birds of a feather flock together, like attracts like. I think it's correct. And so if a person tells me, oh, I really want to have contact, or I really want to have a sighting, I say to them, get your act together first. If you've got anything in your closet, clear it out. Make sure you're in a particular place emotionally and mentally, because the chances are you will attract something like you. Okay? So if you've got hidden crap, I wouldn't recommend it. Okay? But I also...
Basically, you're saying you have your house in order.
Yeah. Yes. Because we recognize who is who. And, I've had people say to me, well, how do I know whether to say yes or not, or whether to say no? Okay. Let's say you've got a being in front of you and they're asking you to take a ride. How do you know if they're good or bad?
Yeah.
I can tell you. I can tell you how. All you do is you quiet yourself, you close your eyes for a moment, and you feel whatever is coming off that person toward you. And this is an interesting thing. But just like you can be in a room and somebody can be watching you and you're not aware of it, but you feel it and you turn around and look in the direction that you're feeling something come from, we all have that ability. And you can feel whether the feeling is positive or negative. So instead of listening to your mind, okay, or conditioning that you've received in the past, okay, listen to your gut, because your body is never going to lie to you. Your preconceived notions, your mind, what you would like to see happen might, but your body will never lie to you. And also, people forget that they have power, that they're sentient beings, that this is our home. And the minute you've got, let's say you've got a being in front of you, and you get afraid, what happens at that moment is all of your power leaves you, and it goes to whoever's in front of you.
Amazing.
And I've taught my grandchildren that. I taught my children that. And I think it's critically important, because I think people don't realize they have a choice. You do have a choice. And just because you have a being in front of you that's technologically advanced beyond you does not mean that they have a right to control you.
That's a good point.
So anyway, I think those are important things.
Very important.
Yeah, I think they are. And I think people forget and they feel helpless.
I remember when we were talking with Seth, and he mentioned the case, and I believe it was the one you're describing. He said he was in a state of ontological shock.
I think that was a different time when he was looking out into the field and they were jumping around.
Oh, okay.
Because he and I had a totally different reaction to that, where the individual, I swear this kid was a hybrid. He had to have been. He had very fine hair. He was very short. His head was oversized. He was a really odd looking human being. Okay. And we had gone out that particular time to see if we could see anything. And I'm trying to think what it was that we did. I don't remember exactly, to draw this guy's attention, but he came up in his truck and he said, "Hi, what are you doing here?" And we told him, and he said, "Okay, I'll be right back." And he drove away and he faced his truck out into the field and he was flashing his headlights. And then he came back and he said to Seth, "Is there somebody here named Zeth?"
Yeah.
And Seth I remember he was wearing a hoodie and he had it up and he just started shaking when the guy said to him, "There's this guy here." Well, first off, Seth said, "My name isn't Zeth, my name is Seth." But Seth used to meditate all the time, and he used to, in his meditations, communicate with a being. And the being's name was, and this was before me, okay, before Seth and I even met. The being's name was Zetar. Isn't that interesting? Zetar, which is like Zeta, but
Yeah.
Zetar. And he would always call Seth Zeth. So first the guy said, "Is somebody here named Zeth?" And then he turned around and he says, "Well, there's this being and his name is," he's out there in one of these crafts and he's saying that he wants to communicate with Zeth, but his name is Zetar. When he said Zetar, my husband just started visibly shaking. I mean, he was shaking. Now, while we're watching these lights jump around in the field, these craft jump around in the field, I have a feeling come over me, and my feeling is one of like a kid that hasn't seen his family for a long time, and I'm going home for Christmas, and I'm going to have all these great experiences, and I am feeling like exhilarated. I'm feeling really positive, and my husband is just the opposite. Isn't that interesting? We're all different. But this guy, we did have interactions with him later. He eventually told us he was from the inner earth. I mean, there was all this stuff.
Wow.
And I believe him because, quite frankly, he did not look. If you saw him out in a crowd amongst other human beings, you would see that he was obviously not like everybody else. Mm-hmm. Okay. Nice enough guy, and he was showing me all these marks and stuff on him, scoop marks, and talking to me about different things. And he was like, kind of saddled up next to me, and I was like, "What is it with this guy? Is he?" I almost wondered if he was a child of mine and hybrid. I had that thought, and I thought, well, that is really weird. Okay, now. I think I'd like to talk a little bit about missing time.
Yeah.
Yes, please.
And the reason why I'd like to talk about missing time is because people understand it a certain way, and it can be experienced a number of ways. Okay, first off, I want to say that not every human being that has a job does it as well as the guy next to him. Some people are very detail-oriented, and they will do everything exactly to the letter. Others kind of rush through things, and they do what they know they're supposed to do, but they're not that concerned about how right it is, okay? Now, the reason why I'm saying that is because, all right, I've experienced missing time different ways. When you miss time, you can actually gain time. Now, I believe that some of these beings, I can't say all because I don't know that definitely. Some beings, they can manipulate time. And so let's say they point out an individual and whoever's in charge says, okay, we're going to take this individual and we're going to take him at this time and we're going to bring him back at that time. Now, whether they're sleeping, whether they're in an awake state, we're going to take them, but we're going to bring them back at the same time so that they're not going to be aware that anything happened. Okay? So sometimes missing time can happen like that, where a person can be having what they think is a sighting, and it's actually a contact. Now, there are a couple or a few common denominators that go along with it. Keep in mind that this has to do with my own personal experiences. This doesn't have to do with anything anyone else has told me, okay? I will sometimes share this with somebody if there's a need, but it's all my own experiences, okay? Now, what common denominators? Seen it time and time again. First off, let's say you're having a sighting, okay? And during that sighting, all of a sudden, let's say you're outside and it's wintertime. We'll use that as an example. It's wintertime outside and you go out there and you know it's cold. You've got a jacket on or whatever, and it's breezy and there's all kinds of noise going on in the neighborhood, okay? All of a sudden, you feel totally comfortable. The breeze stops and everything goes totally silent. These are common denominators with contact. Okay? Now, I'll put that into an example. Okay. I was living out in Franktown, and it was October, and we were sitting out on the back deck, my husband and I, my sister, my older sister, and her husband. And we're all drinking coffee, looking at the stars. All of a sudden, my sister looks down, and her coffee is spilled. And she starts to freak out because her coffee is spilled. Well, I look down, I'm a double Capricorn. I'm like really grounded and logical. And I really piss her off sometimes because she tells me I don't believe her. Anyway, I look down, my coffee spilled too, and I tell her, well, we must have knocked it by accident. We just weren't paying attention. It's probably nothing. Don't worry about it. But at the same time, I'm realizing that it's comfortable. There is no breeze. And outside of us communicating with each other, there is no noise. Okay. But I just let it pass. Okay. I just let it pass because I'm calming her down. Okay. They leave that night. Now, when I'm out on that back deck, I've got on jeans, I've got a blouse, I've got a sweatshirt, I've got a jacket, and I go upstairs to get changed. Well, I take off my jacket, no big deal. Take off my sweatshirt, no big deal. I take off my blouse and I have stinging. I have stinging on the outside of both of my elbows. I look in the mirror and I have two perfect circles on the outside of both of my elbows where all of the skin has been rubbed off.
Wow.
To a point where it was still visible 2 weeks later. Wow. What had happened. And I had people saying to me, what the heck happened to you? Okay. Well, obviously, when the coffee got spilled and everything had shifted, I had some kind of contact. And it probably was not pleasant because I do not have any memory of it. Plus the fact that I had this visual of being like this and being held onto and being pulled through something, and I was pushing against it to not go through it, and it took the skin off my elbows. Interesting, huh?
Yeah.
I had total evidence. Was I connected to MUFON at that time? No, I was not. Did I think about taking pictures? No, I did not. When I was in Turkey, I took a little satellite dish thing out of my forehead, which was bothering me, and I looked at it. It was very strange, and I just threw it away. Was I even thinking? I never knew any of this existed. I didn't know any of it. So I just threw it away. So there was missing time. The only way that I really knew I had that missing time was because I had evidence, which I threw away too, for all intents and purposes. Okay, it's really stupid, but I know I'm not the only one. Okay. Now, also, you can gain time. My husband and I live up in the mountains in Colorado, right in the center of the state. And we have friends that live approximately 45 minutes from us. If we drive about 5 miles above the speed limit, from their house to our house or our house to their house, takes 45 minutes. So we leave their house. We're in the driveway, and by chance, I look at the clock on the dash, so I know what time it is. We're heading home. We're driving our 5 miles above the speed limit, and talking to each other. We come to a certain point in the road before turning off onto our road where there's a red car. There's a little red car, and it's sitting on the side of the road, and it's in a really odd place. To the point where we're both looking at it and commenting on it and wondering why in the world would somebody be sitting there? Okay. We get to our road. We turn right onto it. We pull into our driveway. I look at the clock on the dash. 20 minutes have passed. It's impossible. And my clock was not malfunctioning because I went into the house and it said the same time. Okay. So 20 minutes had passed. Go figure. Missing time. And maybe that red car on the side of the road was something else that was masked.
And that's something that we look for in the ERT is, these different markers. That is something that is a common thing is people do either note cars in strange positions or seeing, like a really old car also in like a strange position like that.
Mm-hmm. Now I can say that, some people say, oh, well, I went to this place and then I got to that place and it was so many hours later and I had no memory of what could have happened, but I know all this time had passed and I should have been there way before then. Well, I can honestly say that I have not had that experience. Okay. But who am I with the experiences that I've had? Who am I to doubt that? I mean, I listen to myself and honestly, I sound crazy to me. Okay. Except I know what my reality is and I know the experiences that I've had. And if whether I sound crazy or not, it's irrelevant because maybe some of what I have to say may actually help somebody who's out there. Mm-hmm. Okay. And if it can, that's a good thing. That's a good thing. Personally, I don't care what people think of me one way or the other,
Anniversary. Sorry to interrupt you. I have a friend of mine. He's compiling a book from 35 witnesses, and the whole common thread is about missing time. And he's working on it now, and so eventually when it'll be released. But I thought that's fascinating. That was the commonality between them is that whole missing time. So I'm really now that you bring this up even further, I'm anxious to, once this book is out, to read what are the differences. And as you mentioned, there's also you can gain time as well.
You can gain time as well. You can. And like I said before, there are common denominators. And so when a person is talking to me about a sighting, I'll ask them, so how long were you outside? Did you have a jacket on? What time of year was it? And they start thinking about it. Or I say to them, was there any noise associated with the object that you saw? I had one guy say to me, oh my God. He said, I live in a really noisy neighborhood. He says, there's always dogs barking all the time. He said, but now that you mention it, when I saw that object, there was no sound at all. He said it was like I was in a vacuum.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't go on to say anything to him about what I thought probably really did happen. But I have my own thoughts on it. Okay. But, it's just like our mind allowing us to remember things. Until we can handle it, our mind will protect us.
Mm-hmm.
And so we still have the memory, but it's not conscious, which is why regression can be extremely helpful if you have a clinical hypnotherapist who is good at what they do. Barbara Lamb is excellent. Yvonne Smith is excellent. I know both of them, and I work with them. Somebody that will not lead you, but somebody who is simply present, so that you can talk about whatever it is your subconscious knows. So, but the missing time factor is really, really important, because people will say to me, well, I'm really, really curious about UFOs and I have this intense interest. I don't even know why, but since I was a little kid, I've had this interest. I've been fascinated by it. And that makes me curious about them, because I guess it's like anything else. You don't really know what you like until you try it, right? And if you've had an experience, there's a part of you that longs to know more, because if it's out of the ordinary, you try desperately to try to understand why. Now, there are a lot of theories out there as to why these beings connect with us. Some people assume there's like one type, and it seems, the grays seem to be labeled a lot, okay? They're labeled a lot. But I'm here to tell you there are all kinds of beings.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you something that I had never thought about. When my mother was dying, she had pancreatic cancer. And I called her because I knew she was dying, and to talk with her. And I was telling her about my experience in Turkey. And I said to her, I started to tell her what the being looked like. And she said to me, you don't need to tell me what they look like. And I said, what do you mean? She said, I know what they look like. Now, keep in mind, up to this point in time, I thought I was the only one. And my family had made fun of me, and I was like the really off-the-wall crazy person, okay? And I said, what do you mean? And she said, I know what they look like. I said, how do you know what they look like? And she said, because they've taken me all over the years many times. And I said, what are you talking about? And she said, they've taken me. Well, I never thought my mother had any contact. I had no idea, okay? And then she says to me, and they're very scary. Now, keep in mind, this being in Turkey probably saved my life, okay? So my experience was not negative. I would say it was pretty darn positive. Unless, of course, I was suicidal and I wanted to die. It was a very positive experience. And so I asked her, when she said they were scary, I said, why do you think they're scary? And she said, because they can pop in and out of dimensions, and they can take you with them. Now, up to that point in time, I'd never, ever thought about dimensions. I never thought about them being interdimensional. It never even entered my mind. But then I had to think about it. Okay, what is reality, right? I don't, maybe it's not as complicated as we've made it. Okay. But anyway, So then she said to me, why are they letting me talk to you? And I said, what do you mean? She said, they've never let me talk to anybody. Why are they letting me talk to you? And I said, I don't know. She said, anytime I've ever tried to talk to anyone, they've always taken my breath away. And I have not been able to talk. But they are letting me talk to you. I want you to find out why. And I said to her, Mom, I don't think I can find out why. But my mother died 2 months later. Okay? But then again, what is death? Because I was told it doesn't exist, that we still continue to be. We shed our physical bodies like a snake sheds its skin, and we continue to exist and to know where we begin and where we end. So, what's interesting is you have experiences over the years, all the things you think about. And so it's really important because we don't live alone on an island, that we talk to each other and that we are open to listening, because I don't believe one of us will ever have all the answers. Now there's a lot of there are a lot of theories as to why they connect with us. Okay. And I hear a lot, oh, well, they have to have our blood. And they're using us. And granted, there is a hybrid program. There is. Okay. There's a hybrid program. Absolutely, there is. And there are many different types of beings involved in that, probably for a lot of different reasons. But I don't feel, I don't know, and maybe it applies to me personally, but I don't believe that it's all negative at the root. Mm-hmm. Okay. Let's take this into consideration. Okay. Let's look at man. Current man. We're a mess. We're violent. We're unpredictable. We're liars. We kill each other. I mean, there are animals in the animal kingdom that would never kill their kind. Mm-hmm. And we do. And for what reason? Okay, so we really desperately need to evolve beyond the point that we are at now, or we will self-destruct. We don't have to worry about somebody coming in and annihilating us. We can do it on our own. Thank you very much. We do not need any help. Okay, so this is what I think. I think that there are collectives of different beings. And this is all based on my own experiences and processing. Okay. I believe that one collective they're observers. They're like the watchers. We're like something they haven't seen before. And they're extremely curious about us, so they observe us. Or that same collective, a long, long time ago, they were like us. And they have no memories of what it was like to be like us. And so they're observing us because they want to see, they're curious. All right. So they're observing us. They're not really interacting with us. They realize that we're a dangerous species and that it's probably not a good plan to interact with us. Okay. So they're simply observing. And these collectives can be reptilian, they can be Nordic, they can be Arcturian, they can be, any number of different things, okay? But they're all in agreement in reference to what their mission is, which makes them a collective, okay? So that's one collective. Another collective, at one point in time, they ate human meat. We tasted good. Or there were other things that they could get from us, which made us a resource for them. And maybe they even trade humankind across the galaxy or solar system, okay? And so they pop in periodically and human beings disappear because we have value in that way to them. They're another collective, okay? So we have that group. And then we have another collective, which is the one that I like. And that collective, they are beings who are genetically in some way connected to us. And they actually look at us as extended family or children. And they want to see us thrive and survive. And because we're such a mess, they take us aboard their crafts periodically to manipulate our DNA to try to get the violence and the anger and all this negative crap out of us. But they can't do it overnight. So it ends up being generational. And it's directly tied to the blood. That's what I think. Okay. So it's not all negative. And maybe with those that are part of the reproductive program, which does exist, maybe we made an agreement before we even came into this current physical body, because we are in essence forever, as far as I understand it anyway. Maybe we made an agreement because in some way we're connected to those beings that we would help them to survive. And we agreed to have children off planet that were hybrid, that would have a better chance. Maybe they've reached a point where they cannot reproduce anymore.
Anniversary, sometimes some of the messages that they share with the witnesses, and that they come from a planet that's slowly dying, or the resources are depleting, and that. Do you find that in your research? That might be one of the reasons why they are interested in our world.
Well, I think they seeded our planet, you know, and maybe there are some out there that would love to have our planet. Okay. Not every being is carbon based, but maybe they would like our planet. But I still think that even though there are collectives, I think that there are probably universal laws that they have to abide by.
Yeah.
Because I had an experience where, which is why I believe what I believe. I had an experience where I'd gone out to McGuire's Ranch another time, and I connected with these little beings, and I was taken aboard a craft, and there were 3 of them. And they almost looked insect-like. Mm-hmm. And they were trying to take implants out of me. Now, there were 3 of them, and one of them was really hesitant. And it was like, this is a big no-no. We should not be doing this, okay? And the other 2 were intent on taking the implants out of me, okay? Now, I think I had a number of implants, and they were trying to take them out, which made me think we must in some way, based on the beings that we deal with, we must be implanted or marked in some way to identify us as dealing with or working with certain groups. Mm-hmm. And it's like, you know, tagging cattle or something.
Yeah, yeah.
And because of that, it makes us off limits to certain things and allowable to other beings. Okay. Well, I'm aboard this craft and I don't know what the heck's happening, but I'm watching these guys argue with each other, and I'm seeing one of them be really nervous. And then all of a sudden this being shows up. He just materializes, and he's a big tall guy. He's got dark hair, he's got large eyes, he's got fair skin, and he's in a robe. And when he enters the room, they scatter. Okay. They scatter. And he pulls me off that gurney thing, and he's standing there, and he's holding my hands, and he's looking me in the eyes. And the sense that I have is, what are you doing here? Okay. And I knew it was totally my fault, my responsibility. And I felt intense shame. Okay. And the next thing I knew, I was back in my vehicle. So what do you make of that?
Do you think they were trying to take the implants out so they could do something else to you?
Maybe put their implants in. Because if you're marked, I'm not well, maybe I am an extraterrestrial being. I don't know. Maybe at my root I am.
Yeah. If it weren't for the one
who told me that I was his brother, I don't know. Okay. There's more questions than there are answers.
And that's the problem with this field, right? Is that, you get one answer, but it leads you to 5 more questions every time.
And that's why it's important to have an open mind. Because I don't believe we're all having exactly the same experiences. I know that we're not.
Yeah.
Now, I can talk about a case that I had in Crested Butte, a woman who had 6 genetic anomalies in her blood. That were, one of them had to do with not aging. One of them had to do with bones not being able to be broken. There were a number of different beneficial things that she had in her blood. And she went to a specialist on blood. And he discovered all of these anomalies in her blood. And he said, normally, like one of them was like an athletic gene. Where you had all this strength and you didn't get tired and all of this other stuff. Well, anyway, he said normally a person would have as many as 2, and that was rare. But for her to have 6 was highly irregular. On top of that, from the time that she was a child, she was part of MK Ultra. I didn't know a darn thing about MK Ultra, but I will tell you this. When you're a researcher, when you hear about it, then you start getting books, then you start learning about it. Okay.
Quite the rabbit hole to go down, that one.
She was actually married to her handler. And she was in the process of divorcing him. But when I tried to connect with her, and she was an experiencer, via email, I set up the appointment and everything and she agreed to it. And I went to call her that day at the time that we had agreed to. And I kept calling and the phone kept being busy. And I thought, well, something else must have come up or she decided she doesn't want to talk to me, which is okay, So then eventually I sent an email saying to her pretty much that, if you want to reschedule, that's fine. If you changed your mind, that's fine too. Just let me know. And she had been sitting there next to her phone, waiting for it to ring. It never rang. She was not on it.
Wow.
However, and this is not the only person that's ever happened to with me. Okay. However, finally, and then she checked her phone by calling her son to make sure it was working properly and it was working okay. And there was not an issue with it. So then I tried calling her again and couldn't get through. And then I sent her an email and I said, how about we do this? You call me. So she called me and she got through. Well, she lived outside of, I think it was Crested Butte. And I could have the city wrong. I'm trying to think right offhand. But anyway, a really exclusive city. Okay. And she lived like a mile out of town. She was in a very prestigious neighborhood. Everybody had land and there was normally no one out there unless they were people that lived there. That morning, she watched a truck pull up and they hammered something orange into the ground at her property line. And she didn't know if it was the electric company or the telephone company. And they drove away, and outside of noticing it, she didn't give it much thought. But then I couldn't connect with her to save my life. So, and then she said during the entire time that we were on our interview, and normally with an experiencer, it can be, oh gosh, it can be 2 or 3 hours.
Yeah.
Okay. She said there was a car driving back and forth in front of her property the entire time. And she said, before we got off the phone, she said, I wanted you to know that. She said, because there's normally no cars on this road. Only the people that live here, and they sure wouldn't be driving back and forth. Interesting.
Wow.
Okay.
No, that's a good one. A really interesting anniversary. I just want to say it's been a pleasure. You know, all these cases.
Am I at the end
so
of it already?
interesting.
Is all the time passed?
It goes by so quickly, too quick sometimes.
I mean, I could have kept talking, but
We'll have to another episode.
We got to have you back.
You and Seth on together and share some more of these stories.
It was a pleasure talking with you, and I would have liked to have heard some of the stuff you had to say too. And thank you very much for inviting me.
Thank you, Anniversary.
Thank you very much for your time. And if you want to see some more of Anniversary, please look into Colorado MUFON.